You're listening to World of Empowerment Radio, your station for practical spirituality in a changing world. And here are your hosts, Aingeal Rose and Ahonu.
I am Ahonu, and I have an interesting experience to relate to you, but I'm going to start with a little story. Many years ago, when our first granddaughter was growing up, we used to play games where she was the teacher, and really she was just relaying experiences from her days in the school, and she'd come back and teach me, and of course I was the difficult student, and we had a lot of fun with that. But at that time she wrote me a little post-it note because I was being a disruptive student. I was being bold, and the note she wrote said, "Ahonu, you will go to the 7th grade for your spelling." And that's the level at which we understood it. Well, today, Aingeal Rose pointed out that that note from all those years ago may have been prophetic. But first, let's explain what's going on. So, the last few days, Earth has had an alignment with, I think, 5 planets. And these kind of alignments happen all the time. But on this particular occasion, it has been pretty intense. It's been pretty intense on Aingeal Rose and myself on the physical body, as well as mental, emotional, and spiritual. But the same thing is happening with a lot of people all over the world. And we know that from our contacts and connections and the reports that we get from people and the readings that Aingeal Rose does. So my own experience last night was that I couldn't breathe. And it does relate back to me saying before and telling the story of how my first baby died and my lungs collapsed and I suffered from pleurisy of the lungs. And that was directly related to the trauma. And they say that the grief is held in the lungs. And it took many years to release that grief. And the way I did it at the time was I journaled, as Aingeal Rose has many times suggested to people that journaling is one of the best ways to get to the root of all these difficulties that we encounter. But in journaling, I journaled and I put it aside and put it in the attic. And one day Aingeal Rose found my writings in the attic and suggested that I put it into the form of a book. And I did. And I just published that book yesterday. And it's in 3 forms. It's a 3-part memoir. And the first part is Why Did He Die? The first book. The second book, The Reincarnation of Columbus. And the third book, Angel of the Forest. Now, in writing and publishing that book, it does entail going back into the trauma of these things. It does necessitate reliving and rehashing so that when I tell the story in the book, it's as real as it was when I was writing it. But in that way, it's very cathartic. And I felt that I had released the pain and trauma of that episode. Now, last night and for the previous few nights, I've been reliving that feeling of collapsed lung. I couldn't breathe. It was painful to breathe. And over the last few days, Aingeal Rose has also been teaching a course on prosperity and realized that prosperity is related to trauma. In other words, if there's memories and trauma in the body, it's very hard to feel that happiness that can come from prosperity because it's related to self-worth. Now, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but all of this is related. So in trying to breathe, I was breathing in health and open lungs and full lungs and breathing out the limitation and the restriction. And in doing that, I did feel some comfort, but I realized that the trauma of the death of Ryan was still there in my lungs. And that's very difficult to overcome because at that point it's in the cellular level and it's in our subconscious and it's in our memories. And that's why when we were doing the prosperity course and doing other kinds of teachings that we do, people often say, it sounds great what you're saying. They're like fluffy words. It's all intellectual stuff, but it's in my body. It's in the physical. How do I get rid of it out of the physical? So the exercise I went through was breathing in the health and breathing out the pain. And I did that for perhaps an hour. And I found myself breathing in other pains as well. It wasn't just the lungs. There was like knee pain. Breathing in perfect knees. Breathing out the knee pain. Breathing in gallbladder health and breathing out the guilt around having my gallbladder removed, and so on. And I'm sure anybody listening will be thinking of their own pains and sufferings over the years. I went through divorce, breathing in perfect relationship, breathing out the pain of divorce, and on it goes. But what I realized then was that as I went through the physical, I came to the next layer. And this is during the night now. I'm lying down in bed. I'm awake, but I'm also in this kind of pseudo half awake, aware dream state, but yet aware of what's going on. And in the next phase, let's call it, it went into the mental. And I realized that I was going through a mental exercise, that this was very much intellectual, that I'm thinking this out, and that the memories were coming up that were being released, but they were in my head. This is mental stuff. So I'd gone from the physical into the mental. And as I was doing this, I started to realize that these phases or separations weren't actually separate at all. They were all part of the one. Because in the in-breath and the out-breath, it's like this represented the physical, and it represented the separation. It represented the division that we feel with God source. And so I was breathing in God and breathing out separation, and mentalizing also that breathing in union, thinking union, and breathing out and thinking separation, that was no longer the case. So as I moved from the physical into the mental, then into the emotional, I realized that the emotions in my lungs were also part of that same division, part of that separation, because when Ryan died, there was definitely separation, but also separation from mother, father. Mother is no longer at her home. All this kind of division that we feel in our families and in our extended families and in the world with wars and all kind of tribal activities that go on that keep us feeling separate. Borders and country divisions and flags and all the rest of that division that goes on. This was all affecting me emotionally. And I felt very sad about all of that. But again, at that phase, I realized that these were not separate. These were all part of what was going on. And at that point in time, it came to me that there was 7 phases like this. The physical, mental, emotional. And as I moved into the spiritual, that also merged with all the others as one. And I realized at that point in time that there were 7 such phases that we are going through as part of moving into the 5th dimension, and perhaps into the 6th dimension. And as we move into the 7th dimension, we may well encounter these same 7 divisions, let's call them, but they are all one. But it's like the physical body is so dense that we must move through them one by one, or we must clear them in the physical first before we can clear them in the mental, and the emotional, and the spiritual. And those other divisions, I don't know yet what they are. I can't put a name on them. And I think the reason why I can't put a name on them right now is because Aingeal Rose reminded me that many years ago we were teaching a workshop where we were realizing that our own growth of awareness is like a student in the first grade. And in the first grade, we don't know what they teach in the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th grade. But we know it's good, and we know that we're going to learn something exciting, and we know we're going to come into the awareness of that as we grow, as our physical body grows up past the point where we'll go into 2nd grade and so on. And that's where it comes full circle to our granddaughter writing that note about you will go to the 7th grade with your spelling. And the spelling, as we know, for anybody who is interested in sovereignty, will know about the spells that are cast by governments, but also the spells that we cast ourselves by our own words. Words are spells. That's why it is spelling. We spell words, and we cast spells with our words. And why is this important? Because in going through this process of those first 4 experiences, of those phases, I realized I was casting spells. That in other words, I could have voiced something. I could have used words that were not wholesome, or I could have used words that were not expansive, or I could have used words that were negative, or I could have used words that were weak, like I might, or I could, or if only, or when this happens, then that. But no, I used spelling of words that were powerful and in the present moment, like I am now. And that was very, very, very powerful. And I think that's the lesson that has come out of this for me. And I hope it will help you in some way. Because if you're in pain, physical pain right now, or perhaps mental or emotional or spiritual pain, realize that this is happening to everybody. Why? Because we're all in this together. The other thing I realized too was in the same way as in the initial phases, when I was separating the in-breath and the out-breath, I was realizing that that was like a man in South Africa and me here in Sedona, or a woman in Australia and a man in England, are all the same. There is no separation. There is no division between people. There is no separation between countries. There is no division between us and God. The separation never happened, only in our own heads. And that was an amazing release. It was like all conflict of the Dark Ages and world wars and all the conflict that we put ourselves through to try and justify our own individuality in some way, or our own specialness, is no longer in the 5th dimension. And that's where we're going. And we're halfway there. The next 3 phases, 5, 6, and 7, I don't know what they are, because it's like we've got to go into the 7th grade to learn what they are. So as this unfolds, and as this awareness comes into the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and so on, I will share it with you. And I hope that these phases of learning are not too painful right now, but that they will be resolved. There's no question about that. And so I'll finish with the realization that it's not just our physical bodies that are moving into this 5th dimension. It's the earth as well. It's not only the earth, it's all our planets. It's the entire universe. And as these changes happen, it's happening not only in our physical bodies, but it's happening in those planetary physical bodies also. So be prepared for earth changes, but know that they are part of the entire body of awareness, our oneness, moving into that unity and moving into that oneness and moving into that awareness. So let's not look at these changes as being negative and say, oh, my knee is paining again, or my liver is at me, or I have a pain in my head, or I'm finding difficulty breathing. and then look at earth changes in the same way. Oh, here's another storm. Here's another tornado. Oh gosh, look at the destruction. Look at the pain it's causing. No, let's realize that all of this is us needing to change at the physical level first, and then at our mental awareness, and then into our emotional release of all that past pain, all those struggles that are handed down through us in the DNA, all those wars that our parents went through, our grandparents, and all that ancestral healing is all happening. It's all coming full circle. It's all being released, and it's being released in the planetary bodies as well. So we leave it with that at the moment, knowing that I will share with you as this develops and as we learn more about the phases and as we move further into the fifth dimensional awareness. Remember too, though, that Aingeal Rose does have training on this, in that a few years ago she did a course called, something about the dimensional split, navigating the dimensional split. And that is very, very useful. I'll put a link to it so that everybody will be able to watch that as well. Okay, till next time. Blessings from myself, Ahonu, and from Aingeal Rose. You can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and on our website at worldofempowerment.com.
Don't miss an episode. Hit the subscribe button now.